and you're listening to Teacher Talk, an ETT Podcast production.
And you're listening to Teacher Talk, an ETT podcast. And today we are with middle school teacher Shawnna Purkis to the show. Shawnna, welcome to the show.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Shawnna, we are excited to have you here. We know you are a great middle school teacher, but also an artist. And it leads to the theme of our episode is talking about how do we tap into our teacher passions and how do our teacher passions impact the way we teach. But Shawnna, before we get to that, why don't you give us just a quick blurb on your educational journey and maybe a little bit of a blurb of your artistic journey that has landed you teaching middle school, grade 8, I believe specifically, correct?
It is, yeah, grade 8.
Perfect. Lead us into that.
So I guess I can start with, didn't originally go into education. All my jobs that I had as a teenager and through university were always teaching. It was ice skating and art and tiny tots and, all of those kinds of things. And I actually have a degree in fine arts and drawing and painting, and I didn't have a real push to become a starving artist either. So after a couple of years of, working here, working there, I realized I'm teaching anyway. So I got my bachelor's of education and got my specialist in visual arts for, middle school, and was hoping to get a job as an art teacher. That didn't happen. I became a general homeroom teacher, which was fine because I grew to love the other subjects. Math became one of my favorite things to teach, even though it was my worst subject as a student. So that's how I ended up. And I've had some years where I've had some art on Rotary and some years where I've had none. But, I make the best of it and put it in my classroom wherever I can.
Shawnna, that's great. I picked up on two things, specifically the idea of I didn't start my professional journey to want to be a teacher, but rather I had a craft or a skill that I was doing, and somehow that lent itself into teaching. I have a very similar sort of story. I never even perceived I'd be a teacher, but I did a lot of work that did sort of coaching. So I did tons of coaching, and I worked at after-school daycares. And in my story, I didn't even notice that the teaching was a natural evolution of that. It was someone I worked with said, you'd make a good teacher and push me into that spot. Just makes me think how many of our teachers have a really robust career skill set beforehand, and teaching, not to say that it was secondary, but it just wasn't your primary thought. So I love that component. I didn't like the component of talking about wanting to be an art teacher and then realizing, just thinking about our system now, do we have the infrastructure to put teachers in the spot to really create meaningful, great learning? You would love to have, as a grade 8 teacher, I teach a good art program, but not an elite art program. I would love to know my kids could go off to an elite art class 3 times a week. And I don't think it's a teacher's fault. I think we know our system is just depriving of getting teachers to run these great programs. But you talked about how you were able to integrate the arts into your homeroom days, sometimes as a Rotary teacher, sometimes as not. But I'd love to know if you could share a few insights on a few lessons you've created, activities you've crafted, where you were able, not necessarily that the math was the star or the English was the star, not that those things aren't stars or important, but where your artistry and your ability to create lessons surrounded art generated great learning that's facilitated the growth of, say, language or geography or history. So I'd love if you could share some of your anecdotes on your integration of arts into your teaching.
Okay, sure. I try and do it as much as possible. I know not every student loves to draw and do that, but it's not about the skill. It's about the creativity and sort of the exploration and stuff like that. And I always give students an option where they can maybe use technology or something else if they're not really handy, but hands-on, like if they're not really handy with drawing and skills like that. But that being said, working with your hands is a really great way to show your creativity. And I push those kids who maybe don't feel like they're artistic to really explore that. So one lesson that I've done repeatedly is, especially if I'm teaching music, but even if I'm not responsible for teaching my own music, and we talked about sending kids off to people who really know what they're doing, I am not very musical. I did play clarinet till grade 11, and I was really bad at it, but I have an appreciation for it. If I have to teach it, I can. At the grade 8 level, it becomes a little bit more difficult because you do need some sort of expertise to be teaching these students beyond the basics. But so when it comes to combining lessons like that, I can do so music, art, and language all rolled into one. One of the activities I do is we listen to different types of music, whether it's Beastie Boys, classical. I put on all different kinds of genres and moods. Some of the stuff the kids know, some of it they don't. And I give them lots and lots of newsprint paper, right? I'm like, all right, here's a pencil, here's some, if we have pastels, I'll do that. Like oil pastels are great, or crayons. I'm like, all right, first we listen to the music, close your eyes, just listen. What kind of energy do you get? What kind of mood do you get? What kind of visions do you see with your eyes closed to this music? And so then we listen to it a second time, and they have to draw to that music. And I really try and tell them we're not drawing realism. We're not drawing what you see as a picture. We're drawing how you feel. So we talk about what types of lines could you represent. So if it's a jagged line, a straight line, a thick line, a thin line, what kind of colors does it make you see? You know, what color palette are you using? What do you envision? Is it, you know, if it's calm music, usually it should represent that. And if it's not calm music, it should, you know, represent something more chaotic. And if it's something that has a rhythm to it, you can have that. So you have all of your, in grade 6, 7, and 8, for sure, we have the elements of design and that we need to include. So that incorporates all of that. Plus, we have the sort of interpretation of music that's happening. And once we go through the different types of music and they've done all this kinds of drawing and we talk about how we feel and what we see and what kind of mood it puts us in, they get to choose the favorite one, any one that they have out of the ones. And they then, depending on how many resources I have, whether it's paint, pastel, pencil, crayon, markers, whatever I have handy, I'd love to do it with acrylic paint, but that's not, or sometimes tempera paint, whatever we have, to get them to take that design and then move it into something that we call abstract expressionism, which is a type of art that we can be learning about. So I'll usually include a lesson on abstract expressionism with some slides of famous artists that have done it in the past. And they're always shocked to find out that these abstract expressionists painted back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that it's not modern art or what we think of, you know, today's, you know, the new millennium type of art. And so then we break it down into a few things. Number one, they pick their favorite abstract expressionist painting and they write about how it makes them feel. And so we get a piece of, you know, writing from that because they have to use descriptive writing. How does it make you feel? What makes you feel that way? And then the other thing they have to do is once they've finished their original piece of art, is they have to write about it, why they chose these elements of art, why they chose the colors and the lines and the shapes and, you know, the patterns, or, you know, why it covers the page it does, how the music inspired them to do that. So we're talking about the feeling of the music, the feeling of the art, and then they're writing about it using their language skills and descriptive words. So that's usually a fun thing to do. The kids really like it because there's no, there's nothing representational in the final piece of artwork. So anybody can be good at it. You know, it's just like those things when they say they see those abstract paintings, they're like, oh, my 2-year-old, you know, sister could do that. We're like, yeah, but you got to think about it. It has to be more intentional. So anyways, that's just one example.
Shawna, that's a great example with lots of different talking points. I love the fact that you can bring all these back and you can bring it back to writing. And even in the description of how they formulate their artistic decisions, they're based on some of the same characteristics they would use in, say, the writing process. And I think that comes back to your first point. And I had so many notes to go to. Is that maybe a student doesn't necessarily like art, and maybe we generalize, and we're very comfortable talking about the student that's sort of anxious with math. But do we ever talk about the student that's anxious with art, and what opportunities are they missing when they have a very preconceived notion of what art is? And I draw a connection to, I always find students are afraid of math because they think they have to have the perfect painting, as in the right answer, in an immediacy. And I wonder if this is sort of the same stigma with art that students come in thinking, I've got to have a perfect painting in one very narrow focused style in order to even want to try to embark on an artistic journey. And I like that your task, the first task you shared there, they're really the notion of what is the perfect line or the perfect drawing is willfully in a cloudy space, or it breaks the norm of what a student may perceive to be what they want to be as an artist, and brought back to that concept of an expertise. I know in the middle school space, we don't often talk about how expertise a teacher needs to be in a space, but just from student voice, I've always found that students really do gravitate and expect and thrive when they feel their teachers are experts in their content. Not that they need to exercise their expertise, not that they need to ego and show off that they can do the work, but I've always found in exit tickets and student surveys that students always appreciate, not always, can't say always, but almost always appreciate and want their teachers to be experts. And it reminds us as teachers how often we built our schedules and we place teachers in spots that doesn't maximize their expertise, but allows them to fit some puzzle to make a schedule work. And I think none of us, I don't think any person in the education space wants that to be the case. But it becomes the case, and Shawna, that leads me into another point, and you can gravitate on any of these things. When you talk about resources, my art is dictated by the resources I have, and I want to have the best resources sometimes to create the best product. But what if I don't have them, and what frustrations lead? And that other part of resources. So do we have access to the right resources to craft our great learning? It reminds me of my podcasting experience where do you start by building your podcast? Do you ask a student to do it off their Chromebook with no great mic, with no great studio, and then hope they produce something great? Or do you invest the resources in a great podcast studio and then allow them to thrive in that space? I understand why you can't always start big, but I can tell you through multiple experiences that when all the tools are in place, it is a lot easier to show students what they're capable of when they have a great mic and a great podcast studio and great resources and a great software and great hardware. They will then, if you build it, they will come. And I've always believed that when you invest the resources and the supplies first, then you can get students to buy in a little bit more, maybe be a little bit more creative when they see that you're investing in them. Same way my expertise. Students appreciate when I have an expertise in a subject matter. So if you wanted to comment on any of those things, you can. If not, I'd love to talk in the idea of why do you think or why do you feel it's really important for schools to try to tap into as much expertise in their schools as they can, maybe specifically in the arts field, which is your expertise, but maybe in the physical education field, the math field, the geography field. Why is there such value when you think of our listenership? Yes, teachers, but maybe in the general public, what are they not seeing? What are they not knowing about what is the real benefit in making sure we have expertise people in our spaces and the resources to be able to facilitate that expertise?
Wow, a great question. I do have a lot of thoughts. So now that I can't speak for every school, but I know a lot of the TDSB schools, middle schools have gone away from Rotary, which means every teacher is teaching almost every subject. So like I said, there are years I get stuck. I don't say stuck, I love, but phys ed and music, things that I'm not really strong at this level. I can teach it at a grade 4 or 5 level, 6 level, but grade 7, 8, you need expertise. What can I teach a 13-year-old boy who's lived, eat, sleep, breathe basketball about basketball, right? So you really need the people who have grown up or learned those expertise to do most of it. So I think that like having the passion in the school, we don't realize how many skills our teachers have in our schools. And if a admin knows about it and they utilize it, the kids learn so much. So I can speak about my school right now. We do have the phys ed teachers. They're allowed to teach phys ed because that is their expertise and that is their passion, which is most important. They do end up coaching almost all of the teams. So it's a really big ask of them to, people think, oh, they're just teaching gym. They coach almost every team before school, after school, tournaments, everything. We have a few other teachers who are really passionate about STEM and technology, and they're running robotics clubs, and they really are making they have lessons and things that they want to teach the kids. They go to admin and they say, hey, can we invest in this? Something that I would have never known about, something that another teacher might know about. That teacher knows about these little robot things, and we gets them in the school. And now all the kids are really passionate about doing this, robotics stuff that we're doing. One of the other teachers is two or three of the other teachers were professional musicians and were not teaching music. And so they got involved in running the choir, which was extracurricular. Today, that choir went down to the board head office for Black History Month and performed. It was a special event. So I think that when administrators are able to see the talents and skills of their teachers, and if they can schedule it so those teachers are teaching those things or allow for extra time for those teachers to run those things, it goes really, really well. And the kids, you're right, the kids know right away, and they get excited because, they know when they're sitting in a classroom where the teacher has just taken a lesson off of the internet and they don't really know what they're doing and they have to look it up. When I have to look up the elements of dance, for example, before I teach them, but when I do the elements of art, they're just in my head. I just know. And, it's so much, we can teach anything because we're teachers first. The subject is secondary.
Yeah.
At the elementary level. But when you have a passion and an innate talent or skill, it's reflected on the class, on the kids, and you're right, they just enjoy it so much more, and the results are so much better.
Shawna, those are some great points. It had me thinking of two things, the power of extracurricular. But of course, it's tough because you can't put the pressure on people or put the burden on teachers to keep the system functioning with all this extracurricular investment. But teachers naturally want to lead and they naturally want to do, and they do want to do what they love. On top of teaching is a specific skill. So yeah, it's great when your schools has a vibrant extracurricular culture, but it's almost like I'll give you the extracurricular if you're giving me the other things. And so it does, and it's not to blame an individual, it's not to gaslight an administrator because they're under unbelievable constraints. But when we're talking about funding our schools and funding our boards, these are the impacts of when you don't have massive funding. Now your principal is making schedules based on making the puzzles work, class sizes and stretching everything, and no longer even worrying about expertise because they simply don't have the ability to.
That's right. And cutting the arts completely.
First thing to go.
Phys ed. They take away phys ed periods. They take away, we had instrumental music at our school that is now gone. There's so many, research. I'm sure everybody's familiar with research, the connection between music and math, and learning a hands-on instrument that makes a sound as opposed to, writing a report, on a musician or an instrument.
We have a lot of data, really clear data on what benefits learning that we often just forget because we're trying new innovative pedagogies that aren't always been around long enough to have the data to support them. And I don't want to mention any to make them sound like they're not helpful, but something like physical education is the same. The data behind what physical education does for your academic growth is crystal clear, but gym periods are constantly cut down in the amount of time. I know we still have our minimum amount, but they're one of the first things that get cut all the time. Certainly, I know as a physical education teacher years ago, the amount of time dedicated to physical education for each student was greatly enhanced. And certainly there was a lot more focus and there was a lot more allocation of resources to buy gym equipment. Now it's almost secondary, not because anyone wants to make it secondary. It just by default becomes. But I like the idea of coming back to some of these really basic foundational things that we know benefit learning that we seem to have forgotten sometimes in all the attempts to try everything that's new, despite whether we have all the data on whether they're all going to work or not. I even thought of when we talk about a lot of talk is about increased violence, increased discipline issues in schools. And I wonder, I haven't seen any data, if you can make a connection. If you had more teachers in positions of their expertise, and maybe, as I make an extension, maybe if in your case, if you were given an art Rotary all afternoon, maybe you'd be more inclined to do a little bit more art extracurricular, tapped into all the art you were doing in the afternoon. I know when I coached a lot of volleyball, I was the physical education teacher and I could tailor gym classes to highlight volleyball skills, and it would enhance the amount of kids that would want to come out to try out for the volleyball team. And I was more excited to coach a volleyball team rather than being a grade 8 teacher that teaches no gym and then decide to coach the volleyball team. It's not quite the same because they're not intertwined and interconnected. I wonder if some of our school issues in regards to violence and student buy-in and student behavior and working past student apathy would actually be benefited if we could connect more teachers to their expertise and their passions.
I think, you're completely right about that. Especially, I teach in a middle school. where there are 150 students in each grade. So I am responsible for my homeroom and I teach them almost every subject, but I don't know any of the other students and what their talents are. As a Rotary teacher, if you're teaching these, you get to see more students, and then you can pull the ones that you can see have passion, or maybe the students who are struggling in other areas, you can help them out more. I think, as far like in my situation with teaching art, I've been asked in the past, can you do a school mural? I would absolutely love to do a school mural, and I've done it in the past with students. But there's a reason why. Besides, so that was one of my jobs before I became a teacher. Is I painted large scale murals. And so it's a skill set I have that I would love to share with my school. They hire these artists that charge so much money. Maybe I should do that. And leave the classroom to do these things, go into schools and do them. And if I were a Rotary art teacher, I could take those students during class time and we could be planning the mural, we could be painting the mural, and then I would be definitely more inclined to be staying after school and working on that instead of, trying to develop my math lessons and other things that I need to do, pulled in so many different directions when you're teaching, 6, 7, 8 subjects, right? It doesn't leave the time to really spend on one particular subject. And it makes a huge difference when you get to know that. And I look at the gym teachers too, because in my school, they're one of the only ones that are just teaching their subject, and they know all the kids in the school, and they know which kids they need to push or recruit or, give the confidence to, hey, maybe you can try out for this team, or, knowing that they need maybe some extra, physical activity to help them focus in class, right? That it would be a great idea if they came to practices at lunch or whatever it is. I think, definitely that when you get to work on your skill with the students and you get to know them, the students can have a connection with another teacher rather than just their homeroom teacher, and a teacher that they share, a passion with.
Shawna, that's a great answer. As you talked about the mural, it just even reminded me, because every school improvement is about activating student voice, honoring student voice, and not that there's anything wrong with hiring someone else to come in and paint a mural, but think of the power of your mural if it's really student-generated images and ideas that are a reflection of that student voice, because student voice isn't always an audio podcast. Sometimes it's the painting you put on the wall. So I made that connection there. This episode specifically, we've talked about a variety of things, but it's about artistry. How do you bring that art into the program? Because that's been your expertise.
Yeah.
Let's say you've got a teacher that's not totally comfortable, and you had to sit and talk with them in the hallway. The best conversations, the best PD you can have as a teacher is those hallway conversations. How
Absolutely.
might an apprehensive teacher to bringing in the arts to intertwine it with another program, or just to build their own art program so they build their own level of competency and confidence? So what advice do you give that teacher that's asked for advice? Because we're not here to give advice if people don't ask for it. But if you have that teacher down the hall that sees what you're doing and says, hey, help me, how do I get started with this? What would you say?
Oh, well, the first thing for a teacher that doesn't see themselves as, like a really capable artist, or doesn't know where to start because they were never interested in it in the first place, there are so many resources out there. God bless Google. There's a couple of really good ones that you can use. It says my computer's dying, even though I have it plugged in. Okay, I'll be really quick. So, go on the internet, find art programs that a lot of teachers have to use YouTube to help them. And so you can show your students a YouTube video, instructional video, and get them to do it. And you can be honest with them saying, this isn't my thing. I'm going to do the best I can. We're going to learn together. And you can use those types of resources. And, also check with the teachers in school. If you know someone that's doing a great job, go and ask them and say, hey, can you help me teach this? Or can you come team teach with me? Or can we switch for a period? I've done that before, where I've gone into a classroom, I've started the art project with them, done the lesson, and then the follow-up and the work is done by the teacher with them. So
I love those ideas, the collaboration or the little switch. I even know over my shoulder that some of my dabbling into art was some block out poetry, because I don't necessarily consider myself an artist, but where did I want to start? So, those are some great tips, some great advice. Reach out to people, swap your classes, swap your teachers, collaborate, team teach with someone. Wonderful idea. Shawna, thank you for being a guest on Teacher Talk and ETT Podcast. It's been great to talk about your teaching and your passion and just generally talking teaching in general. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. It was so much fun. Take care.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Teacher Talk, an ETT podcast production. We hope you enjoyed this insightful discussion. We'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us reach more educators like yourself. Don't forget to visit our website at ett.ca. There, you'll find additional information and resources from ETT. The ideas and opinions shared on this podcast are our own and do not represent the viewpoint of any organization. We aim to provide a platform for open dialogue and thought-provoking conversations. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover or any questions you'd like us to address in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us on social media or email teachertalk@ett.on.ca. We love hearing from our community. Teacher Talk is a Shawnna Educational Services production where we strive to bring you the best educational production and professional development. You can connect with us at shawnpav.com for all your podcasting needs. Until next time, keep inspiring, keep teaching, and keep making a difference in the lives of your students.